My sister tried to embarrass me in front of everyone, but she forgot one crucial detail. Do you remember Rodney? Your childhood friend who cried all the time? My sister Elaine asked in a sweet voice that always meant trouble. I just feel so terrible that he never gets invited to anything, she continued. Since you're single, why don't you bring him as your date? That way at least you won't be alone at my wedding. I almost laughed. She felt bad for him? After nearly drowning him in the pool as a kid and laughing when he cried to his mom? I doubted it, but I still agreed to her request. Rodney was always a nice kid, even if he hid behind me when he got picked on and cried all the time. But I didn't realize my sister Elaine had something else in mind until she forgot to hang up the call properly. I heard her go back to giggling to a friend on her laptop. My sister's actually bringing Rodney. Can you believe it? I told her to bring him out of kindness, and she actually bought it. Wait until everyone sees her walking in with that crying loser. They'll see just how desperate and pathetic her dating life is compared to mine. My eyes widened. I fell right into her trap. And if I backed out now, I was sure she'd turn it around and make me look petty and jealous. So I tracked down Rodney through old school contacts and immediately told him everything, thinking I could at least save one of us from embarrassment. When I called, he sounded genuinely surprised but still agreed to come. I appreciate you looking out for me, but I won't let you go through this alone. Besides, I haven't been to a wedding in years, he said. This could be fun. On the day of the wedding, I was prepared for disaster. I'd even practiced clapbacks for when people laughed at Rodney. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting to see the same scrawny kid with thick glasses and chronic allergies. Instead, I was standing face to face with a 6'2" Henry Cavill-looking guy in a perfectly tailored suit. Hi, I'm looking for Rodney, I said nervously, shifting around. Yep, that's me. Ready to go? The handsome guy responded. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This was not Rodney. Sure, everyone had a little bit of a glow-up since high school, but nothing like this. Shut up, you're not crybaby Rodney. He grinned. Well, I'm not a crybaby anymore, but if it helps, the suit does make me look a little different. But it wasn't the suit. Even when we walked in the wedding hall, every head turned. Some jaws dropped so low, it nearly hit the carpet. My sister's fake sweet greeting died on her lips. Rodney? Her eyes bulged out. Hey, Elaine, it's been years. Thanks for inviting me to your wedding. No one could focus on the ceremony. Not with tall and handsome sitting near the aisle, completely stealing the show. My sister looked furious. She tried to recover her plan during the reception, loudly telling her bridesmaids how Rodney used to cry during PE class. But Rodney was ready. He looked at me with a soft expression and said warmly, That's why I was lucky to have this girl help me through my panic attacks. She was like an angel. My sister had no choice but to smile and agree with the compliment while her bridesmaids cooed about how sweet I was. She tried again later during the wedding toasts, bringing up how Rodney used to get stuffed in lockers, but he just laughed. And now I barely fit in one, he said, gesturing to the muscles. All the girls nearby swooned. Then she pulled out her final trump card. She mentioned his weird anime drawings, and how he probably still watches it like a nerd. But her new husband's face lit up. Hey, I'm a huge anime nerd too. He grinned. Elaine's face scrunched up. What the? You never told me you watched cartoons. Rodney and I giggled on the side watching them break out into their first fight as newlyweds. Things only got worse when my mother pulled Elaine aside and gushed about Rodney, asking, Why didn't you tell me your sister was dating someone so successful? And during the first dance, nobody paid attention to the bride and groom. Everyone's eyes were on Rodney as he danced with me. Elaine finally snapped and cornered me in the bathroom. All right, Spill. Where did you find this actor? This isn't the real Rodney. But when I tried to explain that it really was crybaby Rodney, she refused to listen and just dragged me back to the reception. She asked the DJ to stop and place the spotlight on us. Everyone's curious. What's your little love story? She expected me to admit this was all just a setup, a ruse. But Rodney stepped in and took the microphone. She called me out of the blue. I was honestly shocked, because I'd been wanting to date her since we were kids. I just never had the courage. But this wedding finally gave me the chance, he said, looking straight at me. I felt my heart race as the entire room erupted in awes. Elaine couldn't do anything but laugh in disbelief that her evil plan turned her into the greatest matchmaker. But the real shock came the next morning. Elaine sent me a photo, a yearbook picture of Rodney from his high school. The person in the photo was completely different from the man who'd been my date. Completely different face, different height. Interesting date choice, she texted. Wonder what happened to the actual Rodney. I turned to look at the man still sleeping in my bed. If you're not Rodney, who are you? And what happened to Rodney? He gave me this evil smirk. My whole body went cold staring at that smirk. My phone kept buzzing on the nightstand, but I couldn't look away from his face. This man in my bed wasn't Rodney. He never was. My hand started shaking as I grabbed my phone and saw 3 texts from Elaine with a yearbook photo attached. The kid in that photo looked nothing like the guy sitting up in my sheets right now. I forced my voice to stay steady even though my heart was pounding, so hard I could hear it in my ears. Who are you? What's your real name? He stretched like this was a normal morning and gave me this calm smile that made my skin crawl. My name's Carson. I figured you'd realize sooner, honestly. He said it so casually like we were talking about the weather. I stared at him waiting for more of an explanation. He sat up against my headboard looking completely comfortable. I knew Rodney when we were kids. Thought it would be poetic justice to show up as him at your sister's wedding after how she treated us back then. His explanation sounded practiced like he'd rehearsed it, but something felt off about the whole thing. My brain kept screaming at me to get him out of my apartment right now. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself and stood up. You need to leave. Right now. My voice came out firmer than I expected, but my hands were still shaking. Carson didn't move fast. He took his time getting out of bed and finding his clothes from last night. The whole time he kept talking about how real our connection felt, and how I was overreacting to something that didn't really matter. He pulled on his shirt slowly like he had all the time in the world. We had fun, right? Does it really matter what name I used? I wanted to scream at him, but I just pointed at my door. Get out. Now. He finally left, but not before giving me this look like I was being unreasonable. The second my door closed, I locked it and checked it twice. Then I grabbed my phone and called Maya because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy for feeling scared and violated right now. She picked up on the second ring, and I barely got the words out before I started crying. She told me to stay put and she'd be there in 20 minutes. I sat on my couch staring at my door until I heard her knock. Maya came in with 2 coffees and her laptop already open. She sat next to me and put her arm around my shoulders. Okay, tell me everything from the beginning. We started going through every single interaction I'd had with Rodney from the first message to last night. Maya pulled up the Instagram account that had messaged me about the wedding. The account was created 3 weeks before Elaine's wedding. Only 3 weeks. The profile photo was blurry enough that I couldn't really see his face clearly. I should have noticed that. Maya squeezed my hand. You were trying to be kind. That's not your fault. I pulled up the yearbook photo Elaine sent me and put it next to the wedding photos on my phone. The differences were so obvious now that I was actually looking. Real Rodney had a rounder face and was way shorter, maybe 5'7". He had different features completely. The man who left my apartment this morning was 6'2" and looked nothing like childhood Rodney. How did I miss this? Maya asked me the hard question then. Did anything happen last night that you didn't consent to? I had to sit with that for a minute. I consented to everything we did, but I consented thinking he was someone else. The violation felt complicated in a way I couldn't put into words yet. Maya nodded like she understood, even though I barely understood it myself. We need to find the real Rodney. Prove that Carson isn't him. Maya opened her laptop and started searching. I tried to remember specific things about childhood Rodney that only he would know. He had a birthmark on his left arm. He was scared of dogs after one chased him in 3rd grade. He collected Pokemon cards and kept them in a blue binder. Maya typed while I talked. She pulled up Facebook first, but there were too many people with that name. Then she tried LinkedIn and filtered by our hometown. There. A profile for a Rodney matching our age range. Works in IT for a company in Portland. His profile photo showed a man who looked exactly like the yearbook picture, just older. 15 years older, but definitely the same person. Round face, shorter build, glasses. Nothing like Carson. My hands started shaking again as I stared at that photo. I was completely deceived. And I let it happen so easily. Maya grabbed my laptop and opened a new tab. We need to secure everything right now. She pulled up my email account and started walking me through password changes. I typed in new passwords for my email, my bank accounts, my social media, even my Netflix because I couldn't remember what Carson might have seen when he was in my apartment. Maya made me write each new password in a notebook and hide it in my desk drawer. She pulled out her phone and looked up how to change apartment door codes online. I followed the instructions, my fingers shaking as I entered the new 6-digit combination into the keypad by my front door. The beep confirming the change felt like the first actual thing I'd done to protect myself since Carson walked out this morning. But even as we worked through the security checklist, my brain kept replaying moments from the wedding. How he knew exactly what to say to counter Elaine's attacks. How he touched my arm when we danced. How he looked at me during that microphone speech like he actually cared. Every memory felt contaminated now. Maya squeezed my shoulder. You couldn't have known. He planned this. I picked up my phone to call Elaine. Maya raised her eyebrows but didn't stop me. Elaine answered on the second ring. I told her everything in one rushed explanation. Carson wasn't Rodney. He lied about his entire identity. He manipulated both of us. The silence on the other end lasted maybe 5 seconds before Elaine's voice came back sharp and defensive. Okay, so you brought some random guy to my wedding and now you're trying to make it my fault? I felt my jaw clench. You set me up to be humiliated. You wanted everyone to laugh at me for bringing the crybaby kid. That's what created the opening for Carson to step in and pretend to be him. Elaine scoffed. I didn't tell him to lie about who he was. That's on you for not recognizing your own childhood friend. Maybe if you'd actually kept in touch with people instead of being so isolated, you would have known what Rodney really looked like. Her words hit exactly where she intended. You literally sent me the yearbook photo proving he's not Rodney. You know I was deceived. And you're still trying to make this about my judgment instead of taking any responsibility for setting up a cruel trap at your own wedding. Elaine's voice got louder. I was just having fun. Everyone plays little jokes at weddings. You're the one who slept with a complete stranger and now you want to blame me because you feel stupid. I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. Maya took it from me and set it on the coffee table. She's not going to help. I know, but I needed to hear her say it out loud. Maya nodded and pulled her laptop closer. She started typing something while I sat there feeling the anger burn hotter than the fear for a minute. Carson had to know about Elaine's plan somehow. He knew exactly what she was trying to do, which means he was either watching our family dynamics online, or he had some previous connection to us that let him know about the wedding trap. The thought made my skin crawl. This wasn't some random opportunity he stumbled into. He planned this. He researched us. He knew Elaine wanted to humiliate me, and he used that knowledge to slide into Rodney's identity at the perfect moment. Maya looked up from her screen. This is way more calculated than just some guy pretending to be someone else for fun. This is someone with a grudge or an obsession who saw his chance and took it. I spent the rest of the day checking my door lock every 20 minutes. Every notification on my phone made me jump. Every footstep in the hallway outside my apartment made me freeze and listen until it passed. Maya stayed through the afternoon even though I knew she had work stuff to do. We ordered Chinese food because I couldn't imagine going to a restaurant where Carson might show up. The delivery guy knocked and I made Maya answer the door while I watched from the kitchen. I felt ridiculous and violated and angry all at the same time. We ate on my couch with the TV on, but I couldn't focus on anything playing. Maya kept up a steady stream of conversation about normal things. Her job, her annoying coworker, some show she was watching. I was grateful she wasn't making me talk about Carson every second, even though he was all I could think about. When Maya finally left around 8, I locked the door behind her and checked it 3 times. I tried to watch TV but gave up after 30 minutes of staring at the screen without processing anything. I got ready for bed early, thinking maybe I could sleep off the worst of the anxiety. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling. Every small sound in my apartment building felt threatening. The neighbor's door closing, someone walking up the stairs, the building settling, the heater clicking on. My mind kept spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if Carson kept a key to my apartment somehow? What if he copied information from my laptop while I was asleep? What if he took photos of me that I don't know about? What if he shows up at my work? I checked my phone. 11:30. I tried closing my eyes, but my brain wouldn't shut off. At 1:15, I got up and checked the door lock again. At 2:30, I checked all my windows. At 3 in the morning, I finally gave up and texted Maya. I know you're probably asleep, but I can't stop thinking about what he might do next. She texted back within 2 minutes. I'm awake. Do you want me to come back over? I told her no, but thank you, and that just knowing she was awake helped. We texted back and forth for another hour about nothing important until I finally felt calm enough to try sleeping again. I dozed off around 4:30 and woke up at 7 feeling worse than if I hadn't slept at all. But lying in bed feeling anxious wasn't helping anything. I got up and made coffee. I needed to approach this like a problem I could solve instead of just a thing that happened to me. I opened my laptop and created a new document. I titled it Carson Timeline and started writing down everything I knew. When he first messaged me, what the account name was, every conversation we had leading up to the wedding, everything he said at the wedding itself, every interaction after. I went through my phone and took screenshots of all our text messages. I wrote down everything he told me about his supposed life, his job that he was vague about, his apartment that he never invited me to, the gym he claimed to go to but never specified which one. Every detail I'd dismissed as normal now looked like a red flag I should have caught. Maya came back over mid-morning with more coffee and bagels. She sat next to me and looked at my timeline document. This is good. This is really good. We need to find out where he actually lives and works. She opened my phone settings and started going through location history. I watched her scroll through weeks of data. Look at this. Every time you two met up, it was either here at your place or at public spots like coffee shops or restaurants. He never once invited you to his apartment. I pulled the laptop closer and added that to my notes. I tried to remember specific conversations from the wedding and after. Every time I'd asked Carson detailed questions about his life, he'd deflected. When I mentioned maybe visiting his place sometime, he'd changed the subject to how much he loved being at my apartment because it felt cozy. When I asked about meeting his friends, he'd said something about them all being busy with work. Every deflection had seemed smooth and natural at the time. Now they looked like obvious evasion tactics. Maya pulled up our text message history, and we read through everything chronologically. He always messaged first. He texted at weird hours like 2 in the morning or 6 in the morning like he was checking when I was online. The pattern felt creepy now in a way I'd dismissed as him being really interested when I thought he was Rodney reconnecting with an old friend. Maya pointed at the screen. He was monitoring your activity, seeing when you were awake and active so he could time his messages to seem natural. I added all of it to my timeline. Then I opened LinkedIn and searched for the real Rodney. His profile came up again with that photo that looked exactly like the yearbook picture, just older. I clicked the message button and started typing. Hi, Rodney. This is going to sound strange, but someone impersonated you at my sister's wedding last month. I'm trying to verify some information and wanted to confirm that you weren't at a wedding in our hometown recently. I kept it short and factual. I didn't want to sound crazy or accusatory. I just needed confirmation that Carson definitely wasn't somehow the real Rodney with a different past than I remembered. I hit send and closed the laptop. Maya looked at me. Now what? Now we wait and see if he responds. And I figure out what to do next if he confirms that he wasn't there. Maya closed her laptop and looked at me with that serious expression she gets when she's about to say something I won't want to hear. She suggested I think about hiring a private investigator to find out who Carson really is and whether I'm actually in danger. The idea made my stomach hurt because I'm already barely making rent, and my savings account is basically empty. But the thought of not knowing who this person is or what he wants felt way more dangerous than being broke for a few months. Maya must have seen the panic on my face because she immediately pulled out her phone and started searching for investigators in our area. I watched her scroll through websites while my brain kept circling back to the fact that I slept with someone whose real name I don't even know. After about 20 minutes, Maya found a website for someone named Tanner Barron, who focused on digital investigations and identity verification. His rates were listed right on the site, and they were steep. Like really steep. But not completely impossible if I cut back on everything else for a while. Maya looked at the consultation fee and offered to split it with me as a loan, which made me want to cry because I hate borrowing money, but I also couldn't do this alone. I nodded, and she immediately called to set up an appointment for that evening. While we waited for Tanner's office to call back with a time, my phone buzzed with a text from Carson. My whole body went cold when I saw his name on the screen. Maya grabbed my phone before I could and read the message out loud. Carson was asking if I was okay and saying he wanted to talk through what happened, using the same warm and caring tone he'd used throughout the entire wedding and after. He wrote like we'd had some minor fight about where to eat dinner, not like he'd lied about his entire identity and tricked me into sleeping with him. I felt my skin crawl reading his words because he was acting like I was overreacting to something small instead of being completely violated by his deception. Maya handed my phone back and told me not to respond under any circumstances. She pointed out that Carson was testing me to see if I'd engage with him, probably trying to figure out whether I was angry enough to actually take action, or if he could smooth everything over with his charm like he probably had with other people before. Her outside perspective helped me see the manipulation tactics that I definitely would have fallen for if I was processing this alone, because part of me wanted to believe his warm tone meant he wasn't actually dangerous. Tanner's office called back and gave us an appointment time for 7 that evening. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing all my documentation into a clear timeline with screenshots and notes about every inconsistency I could remember. Maya helped me print everything out and put it in a folder so I'd look prepared and serious instead of like some dramatic person making up stories. At 6:30, we drove to Tanner's office in a building downtown that looked professional and legitimate, which made me feel slightly better about spending money I didn't have. Tanner met us in the lobby and brought us back to his office, which had filing cabinets and computer equipment and framed certificates on the walls. He was probably in his 40s with gray hair and glasses, and he treated the whole situation like a serious case instead of making me feel stupid for being deceived. That alone was worth something after Elaine's reaction that morning. I showed him my timeline and all the information I had about Carson, including the wedding photos and the phone number he'd used to contact me. Tanner looked through everything carefully and asked specific questions about Carson's behavior and what he'd said about his life. He explained that he'd start with something called open source intelligence gathering, which meant using the photos from the wedding and the phone number and any other digital footprints to identify who Carson actually is. He warned me this might take a week or maybe 2, and that I absolutely should not engage with Carson at all during the investigation, because it could tip him off that I was looking into his background. I asked Tanner if this kind of situation happens often, because I felt so stupid for not seeing through Carson's lies. Tanner told me that identity deception in dating contexts happens way more than people realize, usually for financial scams, but sometimes for revenge, or because someone is obsessed with another person. Hearing that I wasn't uniquely foolish helped a little bit, though I still felt angry at myself for ignoring all the signs that were probably obvious now that I looked back. Maya and I left Tanner's office around 8 and went back to my apartment. Over the next few days, Carson kept sending occasional texts that switched between friendly check-ins, asking how my day was, and slightly wounded messages about me ghosting him after we'd had such a great connection. I saved every single message exactly like Tanner told me to, but I didn't respond to any of them, even though part of me really wanted to confront him directly about all his lies and ask him what he thought he was doing. On the 3rd day after I'd sent my LinkedIn message to Real Rodney, he finally responded. My hands were shaking when I opened the message because I knew this would confirm everything one way or another. Rodney wrote that he was really confused because he definitely wasn't at any wedding, and he hasn't been back to our hometown in 5 years since his parents moved to Arizona. He included a current photo of himself that showed a guy who looked exactly like the yearbook picture, just aged up about 15 years, with the same round face and features that were completely different from Carson's. Seeing that photo made everything real in a way that hurt my chest, because now I had definite proof that Carson was an imposter using Rodney's childhood identity. I messaged Rodney back right away explaining the full situation about my sister's wedding, and how someone showed up claiming to be him. Rodney responded within an hour saying he was shocked and really sympathetic about what happened to me. He said he vaguely remembered some guy named Carson from elementary school, who hung around the edges of their friend group, and seemed kind of obsessed with fitting in. Rodney offered to do a phone call if it would help me understand the situation better, which felt like the first genuinely kind thing someone had done without any hidden motive since this whole mess started. I scheduled the call with Rodney for that same evening because waiting felt impossible when every minute without answers made my skin crawl. When my phone rang at 7, I answered on the first ring and heard his voice, which sounded nothing like Carson's deeper tone. Rodney started by saying he'd been thinking about Carson all afternoon and remembered more details now that his memory was jogging. He told me Carson was this kid who hung around their friend group in elementary school, but never quite fit in, always trying too hard to be funny or cool in ways that felt forced. Rodney said Carson got weirdly fixated on people, like he'd pick someone and try to copy everything they did or said, almost like he was studying them. He moved away in middle school, so he lost touch with everyone from back then, but he remembered Carson had this strange habit of blaming other kids when social stuff went wrong for him. Like if Carson didn't get invited to a birthday party, He'd convince himself it was because Rodney or someone else had talked badly about him, even when that wasn't true at all. Rodney's voice got quieter when he said Carson seemed to think Rodney was somehow responsible for Carson not being popular, which made no sense because Rodney was getting bullied himself back then. Then Rodney brought up something that made my stomach drop even further. He said Elaine and her friends were cruel to lots of kids. Not just him, and Carson was definitely one of their targets too. Rodney remembered Carson trying to get revenge once by spreading rumors about Elaine and her clique, but it backfired completely and made things way worse for him. The other kids started avoiding Carson even more after that, and Elaine's group made his life miserable for the rest of that school year. Rodney paused and then said something that made everything click into place. He told me it seemed like Carson had been nursing these grudges for over 15 years, just waiting for the right moment to act on them. The wedding must have looked like the perfect opportunity to get back at Elaine, while also inserting himself into a situation where he could feel important and desired. I thanked Rodney for being so honest and helpful when he didn't have to be. Then I asked if he'd be willing to provide a written statement confirming he wasn't at the wedding, in case I needed it for legal stuff. Rodney agreed right away but asked me to please keep him out of any public drama, because he had his own life now and didn't want to get dragged into whatever mess Carson had created. I completely understood that request since Rodney was just an innocent person, whose identity got stolen for someone else's twisted scheme. After we hung up, I sat there feeling like puzzle pieces were finally coming together, even though the picture they formed was really disturbing. 2 days passed where I barely slept, jumping at every sound and checking my locks obsessively. Then Tanner called with his first report, and I grabbed my phone so fast I almost dropped it. He told me he'd traced the phone number Carson used back to a prepaid account bought with cash, so there was no direct name attached to it. But the metadata from the wedding photos I'd sent him told a different story. Those photos were taken with a device registered to someone named C. Ayers, and Tanner was running that name through every database he had access to right now. He said he'd have a full profile for me within a few days, and hearing the certainty in his voice made everything feel more real. I felt this weird mix of validation and dread spreading through my chest. Validation because Tanner was finding actual concrete information that proved I wasn't overreacting or imagining things. But dread because it meant this whole situation was real and serious, not just some misunderstanding I could laugh off later. Maya came over that evening without me even asking, showing up at my door with cleaning supplies and garbage bags. We spent 3 hours going through my entire apartment, removing anything Carson might have touched. Every cup he drank from went in the trash. The towel he used got thrown out. We stripped my bed and washed everything twice, and Maya helped me wipe down every surface in my bedroom. It felt both practical and symbolic, like we were erasing his presence from my space even though I knew the violation went deeper than physical objects. While we worked, my phone buzzed with a new text from Carson. This one was longer than his previous messages, saying he missed me and really wanted to take me to dinner to clear the air. Then he named a specific restaurant, this little Italian place I'd mentioned liking once in passing during the wedding reception. The fact that he remembered that detail while lying about literally everything else made me feel surveilled in a way I couldn't quite explain. It was like he'd been collecting information about me, filing away my preferences and habits, all while pretending to be someone he wasn't. Maya read the message over my shoulder and said it was creepy as hell that he was tracking what I liked while maintaining this massive deception. I saved the text like Tanner told me to, but didn't respond, even though my hands were shaking. 2 days later, Tanner sent his full report on Carson Ayers, and opening that email felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. The report was worse than anything I'd imagined in my worst spiraling thoughts at 3 in the morning. Carson had a criminal record that included a misdemeanor fraud conviction from 3 years ago. But what really made my blood run cold was the restraining order filed against him by an ex in another county just 18 months ago. I read through the case summary 3 times, and each time it felt more like reading about my own experience. The woman described Carson lying about his identity when they first met. She talked about his love-bombing behavior, showering her with attention and affection. She explained how he refused to accept when she ended things, continuing to contact her through different numbers and accounts. And she detailed his veiled threats about ruining her reputation if she didn't give him another chance. Every single thing she described matched what was happening to me right now. Reading her words made me feel physically sick, because I realized I wasn't his first victim. I was just the latest person in what was clearly a pattern of predatory behavior. And unless someone actually stopped him, I probably wouldn't be his last victim either. I printed out the entire report with shaking hands and grabbed my keys. Maya asked where I was going, and I told her I was taking everything to the police station because I couldn't just sit here knowing what Carson was capable of. I felt scared and completely exhausted, but I was also determined not to let this go. The desk officer at the police station listened to my brief explanation and directed me to Detective Stuart Gregory, who handled cases involving stalking and identity-based crimes. Gregory's office was small and cluttered with file folders, but his desk had photos of kids who I assumed were his, which somehow made me feel slightly safer. He read through Tanner's report carefully, taking his time with each page, and then started asking me detailed questions about everything Carson had said and done. What exactly did he claim about his identity? When did I first realize he was lying? Had he asked for money or access to my accounts? Did he ever explicitly threaten me? Gregory was professional and took me seriously, which was a relief after Elaine's dismissive reaction. But then he explained something that made my stomach sink. He said that unless Carson had made explicit threats, or actually stolen money from me, Pursuing criminal charges was going to be really difficult. I wanted to scream or throw something, but I just sat there staring at the detective's desk while he explained my actual options. Gregory pulled out a form and said I could file for a restraining order in civil court, which wouldn't put Carson in jail, but would legally require him to stay away from me. He told me to save every text, every call, every social media message because documentation would be crucial if Carson violated the order. Then he gave me practical safety advice that made everything feel more real and scary. He said I should change up my daily routines so Carson couldn't predict where I'd be, that I should always be aware of my surroundings, especially in parking lots, and when entering my apartment, and that I should trust my gut if something felt wrong. The way Gregory talked about it made it clear he'd seen situations like mine before, and that some of them had ended badly. I thanked him for his time and walked out of the station feeling like I had a plan, even if it wasn't the justice I wanted. Maya was waiting in her car, and when I got in, she immediately asked what happened. I explained about the restraining order option, and she said we should go file the paperwork right away before I lost my nerve. That afternoon, we drove to the courthouse and filled out the temporary restraining order application at a window where a tired-looking clerk processed domestic cases. I attached printed copies of everything from Tanner's investigation, screenshots of Carson's messages, the yearbook photo Elaine sent, and a written statement from real Rodney confirming he wasn't at the wedding. The clerk looked through the stack of papers and told me there would be a hearing in about 2 weeks where a judge would decide whether to grant a longer order. She explained that the temporary order would be in effect until then, but that Carson would be formally notified, which might make him angry. Maya squeezed my hand while the clerk stamped the forms, and I tried not to think about what Carson would do when he found out. We grabbed coffee after, and Maya made me promise to call her if anything weird happened. Then she drove me home because I was too shaky to drive myself. That night, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang with Carson's number. I stared at it buzzing on my nightstand and didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail while my heart pounded. A minute later, the voicemail notification popped up and I almost deleted it without listening, but I remembered Gregory said to document everything. I put the phone on speaker and played the message. Carson's voice sounded hurt and confused, asking why I was avoiding him, and saying he thought we had something special. He said he didn't understand what changed and that he just wanted to talk things through like adults. His tone was so convincing and wounded that for a second I actually felt guilty, like maybe I was overreacting to everything. Then I remembered the yearbook photo showing a completely different person, the criminal record Tanner found, the restraining order from his ex describing the exact same behavior, and I felt sick that I almost fell for his act again. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Detective Gregory's email address like he told me to do. The next morning, Gregory replied confirming that Carson's pattern of ignoring my silence and continuing to contact me would support the restraining order application. He said that each message Carson sent was actually helping my case even though it felt invasive and scary. Knowing that Carson was basically building evidence against himself with every text made me feel slightly less powerless, though I still jumped every time my phone buzzed with a new notification. I was trying to focus on work emails when Elaine called 2 days later. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she'd just keep calling, so I picked up. She asked if I was over my drama yet in this breezy tone like I'd been upset about nothing, then said Mom was asking questions about why I wasn't coming to family dinners. Something inside me snapped hearing her act like this was all some minor inconvenience I was causing. I told her clearly that she set me up to be humiliated at her wedding, that her cruel plan created the exact opening Carson needed to deceive me, and that I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine anymore, just to make family gatherings comfortable for her. Elaine immediately got defensive, saying she had no idea Carson would pretend to be Rodney, and that I couldn't blame her for his choices. I felt my jaw clench because technically she was right that she didn't know about Carson specifically, but she completely missed the point that her cruelty enabled the whole situation. I told her I needed space from her, and that I wasn't going to discuss it further right now. She started to say something about me being dramatic, but I hung up before she could guilt-trip me into backing down like I always did. My hands were shaking after I ended the call because I'd never stood up to Elaine like that before. Maya came over that evening, and I told her about the conversation while we ate takeout on my couch. She pointed out that I'd never set real boundaries with Elaine in my entire life, and that what I did was actually progress, even though it felt uncomfortable and scary. We talked about how my lifelong pattern of keeping peace in my family had made me vulnerable to Carson's manipulation, because I was so used to ignoring red flags to maintain relationships. Maya said that learning to recognize when someone was treating me badly, and actually doing something about it, was a skill I'd been prevented from developing. Over the next week, Carson's messages shifted in tone from confused and hurt to slightly more aggressive. He sent texts asking why I was playing games with him and saying he deserved an explanation for my behavior. I didn't respond to any of them, but I saved every single one, and the tone change confirmed exactly what Detective Gregory had warned me about. Men like Carson escalated when they lost control over a situation, and Carson was clearly getting frustrated that his usual tactics weren't working. Each message felt a little more demanding and a little less friendly. Then Tanner called with new information he'd found by tracing utility records to Carson's current address. He said Carson was on probation for the previous fraud conviction, which meant any new criminal behavior could result in actual jail time. I felt a surge of hope hearing that because it seemed like real leverage. But when I mentioned it to Detective Gregory, he cautioned me not to confront Carson directly with the information. He said that could be seen as threatening and might hurt my restraining order case. The day before the hearing, Carson sent a message that made my blood go cold. He said he knew I'd been investigating him, and that I should be careful about making accusations I couldn't prove. The threat was clear even though he didn't say anything explicitly violent. I screenshot the message immediately with shaking hands, and forwarded it to both Detective Gregory and the lawyer Tanner had recommended for a consultation. The lawyer replied within an hour saying this message significantly strengthened my case, and that I should bring printed copies to the hearing tomorrow. I barely slept that night knowing I'd have to face Carson in court the next day. Morning. I walked into the courthouse with printed copies of every message Carson had sent, my hands shaking as I went through security. The hearing lasted 40 minutes, and the judge granted the restraining order without much debate after reviewing all the evidence Tanner had gathered. Walking out of that courthouse felt like the first real step toward safety, but I knew a legal document wouldn't magically fix the damage Carson had caused or make me trust people again overnight. Maya recommended I talk to someone who specialized in this kind of situation, so 2 weeks after the hearing I started seeing Jacinta Liu, a therapist whose website mentioned trauma and boundary work. The first session felt awkward because I kept downplaying what happened, calling it a misunderstanding or saying it wasn't that bad compared to what other people go through. Jacinta stopped me halfway through and asked why I was minimizing something that clearly violated my safety and trust. I didn't have a good answer. Over the next several sessions, she helped me see the pattern between how Elaine had treated me my whole life and why I didn't recognize Carson's red flags. I'd spent so many years making excuses for Elaine's cruelty to keep family peace that my instinct was to ignore warning signs and prioritize other people's comfort over my own safety. Jacinta said this wasn't a character flaw. It was a learned behavior from growing up in a family where speaking up about mistreatment got me labeled as sensitive or dramatic. In our third session, I told Jacinta about specific times Elaine had humiliated me growing up, and how I'd always brushed it off as sibling rivalry or her just being competitive. She asked what I would think if a friend described their sister treating them that way, and I realized immediately that I'd tell them it was cruel and unacceptable. Somehow I'd never applied that same standard to my own experiences. Jacinta gave me practical tools for recognizing manipulation tactics, like noticing when someone makes you feel responsible for their emotions, or when they rewrite history to make you doubt your memory. She also taught me how to set boundaries without feeling guilty, which felt like learning a language I should have known my whole life. The work was uncomfortable because it meant acknowledging how much I'd tolerated and how that made me vulnerable to someone like Carson. The financial cost of everything hit hard around week 5. Between Tanner's investigator fees, the legal consultation, new locks, and a security camera for my apartment and ongoing therapy sessions, I'd burned through most of my savings. I picked up every extra shift my manager offered and started doing side gigs on weekends just to cover the basics. Maya noticed I looked exhausted and offered to loan me money, but I turned her down even though I appreciated it. I needed to prove to myself that I could handle this independently without depending on someone to rescue me. The stress of working 60-hour weeks while processing trauma made me feel like I was running on empty, but giving up wasn't an option. I meal prepped cheap food on Sundays, canceled my streaming subscriptions, and stopped buying coffee out. Every dollar mattered when I was rebuilding my sense of security from scratch. Around week 7, some people from the wedding started reaching out asking what really happened with Carson. I'd stayed off social media mostly, but apparently Carson had been posting vague things about crazy exes and how some people can't handle genuine connection. A bridesmaid I barely knew sent a long message asking for my side of the story because she'd heard conflicting accounts. I realized Carson was running his own counter-narrative to make me look unstable or vindictive. I wrote back a brief, factual explanation to the people I actually trusted, saying Carson had lied about his identity and that I'd gotten a restraining order after discovering his criminal history. I didn't go into detail about the manipulation or the violation I felt, just stuck to facts that could be verified. With everyone else, I let it go. Some people would believe Carson's version no matter what I said, and trying to control the narrative with acquaintances I'd never see again wasn't worth my energy. It stung knowing people thought I was the problem, but Jacinta reminded me that people who matter would trust me, and people who didn't know me well enough to give me the benefit of doubt weren't worth worrying about. 3 months after the restraining order, Detective Gregory called with news that shifted everything. Carson had violated his probation by contacting one of his previous victims through a fake social media account, and the woman had immediately reported it to police with screenshots. His probation officer filed a violation report, and the judge revoked his probation, resulting in a 4-month jail sentence. Gregory explained this removed the immediate threat to me and created a documented pattern that would follow Carson if he tried anything similar in the future. Knowing Carson was actually facing consequences felt surreal after months of feeling like the system couldn't really protect me. Gregory said the jail time wasn't long, but it sent a clear message that Carson's behavior had real repercussions, and the violation on his record would make any future restraining orders easier to enforce. I thanked Gregory for keeping me updated and for taking the situation seriously from the beginning, when I'd felt like I was overreacting to everything. 6 months after the wedding, I took stock of where things stood. My apartment had a new security system with cameras covering the entrance, and a smart lock I could monitor from my phone. The restraining order remained active with no violations since Carson's jail time, and I'd learned to stop jumping every time I got a notification. Therapy with Jacinta was teaching me to trust my instincts instead of overriding them to keep other people comfortable, though I still caught myself minimizing things sometimes. My relationship with Elaine stayed distant, with clear boundaries I'd set about not attending family events where she played victim about our estrangement. Mom kept trying to smooth things over, but I'd stopped explaining myself and just repeated that I needed space. I still had moments of anxiety about dating and whether I'd ever trust someone enough to be vulnerable again. Sometimes I'd see a tall guy with dark hair and my heart would race before I realized it wasn't Carson. The situation didn't resolve perfectly with Carson fully punished, or my family magically understanding what I went through. But I'd built real safety measures and I was doing the ongoing work to heal, which felt like the most honest outcome I could ask for. I wasn't ignoring red flags anymore or sacrificing my safety to keep peace, and that shift alone made everything worth it.